the mitochondria, as you pointed out, they are the sentinels of the cell. So when an infection comes in, let's say the mitochondria are big and juicy and they look like that big cigar-shaped organelle that you're used to seeing. But what happens when a virus shows up or a bacteria shows up or inflammation shows up? They basically break down into smaller little pieces. I don't know if you've seen that, but they actually break down. The audience I'm speaking, I don't know if you've seen this, but the mitochondria, they break down into these smaller little circles, and part of that is to limit energy production because they don't want to have a lot of ATP around that the bacteria could use to perpetuate themselves. So everybody feels tired when they're sick because the mitochondria are shutting down ATP production, right? So if you have chronic inflammation and it's related to a chronic infection, you can go into this cellular defense response, which is the mitochondria actually shut down. And there's 2 or 3 stages to actually get the mitochondria back. And sometimes what happens in chronic fatigue syndrome or extended Lyme or COVID, long COVID, or things like that, is the mitochondria, instead of resuming back to a healthy, big plump mitochondria that's able to generate ATP, it gets stuck in these intermediate steps and has a hard time getting out.
Boy, where to begin with today's podcast? Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, he is a longevity specialist. What a rich conversation, chock full of different things you can do to improve your health, but thinking about how quickly you are aging. One of the things that I appreciate about Jeff, one of the first questions I asked him is, how do people know if they're aging too quickly? And he said, very practically, look in the mirror. If you look like you're aging faster than others, that's a telltale sign that there are some things happening on the level of the cell, of the mitochondria, of inflammation, of nutrient deficiencies that are leading your cells and therefore your organs and therefore your body and therefore your skin to age more quickly. We discuss exercise, and there's some very important, I know this sounds maybe simple, but there's some very practical take-homes with small but significant changes you can make to what you're doing and how you're exercising that don't require special equipment or anything crazy that will likely have a very quick but substantial impact on how you feel, how you function. We go pretty deep into mitochondrial function and how, especially if one is coming from a place of presumably chronic inflammation or chronic symptoms, and usually these two are different sides of the same coin, what you can do to sort of unstuck, for lack of a better term, your mitochondria, which can become impaired when there's been chronic inflammation. And there are things that we can do, and Jeff has quantified some of these with in-office studies, certain nutrients and other technologies like ozone, red light, and key nutrients that can help the mitochondria start working better. And the mitochondria will dictate cellular energy, therefore cellular health, and the cells make up the organs make up the person, and there you have one very important underpinning of the aging process. There's more to it, but that's just a quick snapshot of what was an awesome conversation, especially if you're like me and you think about your health maybe in two frames. One is resolve any very specific issue, constipation, IBS, SIBO, fungal overgrowth, food reactivity, brain fog, insomnia. Resolve those things and get to more normal function. And then from there, how can I keep improving my mind, my skin, my energy, and just truly anti-aging or optimizing my entire body, my entire system, and then reaping all of the benefits of being able to move freely, to have ample energy, to feel resilient and robust and healthy. So, great conversation on anti-aging, which I feel very nicely dovetails in from the work that we often discuss or do here on the podcast and in the clinic, which is getting rid of those monkey wrenches in the system that can impair health, and then continuing to make your own health and wellness this never-ending project to just try to feel as best as you possibly can. With that, we will now go to the conversation with Dr. Jeff Gladden. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm here with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, who is a wealth of knowledge on anti-aging, and certainly as someone who myself is aging, as we all are. I'm always trying to do whatever I can to prevent accelerated aging of my brain, my gut, my skin, my joints. So, Jeff, I'm really excited to kind of go deeper into an area that I kind of touch on in the periphery, but is really sort of squarely in your wheelhouse. So, welcome to the show.
Oh, good to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah.
To start, there's probably some obvious signs of aging, but for the person who may not be sure, am I aging at an appropriate rate? Am I aging too quickly? Are there some telltale signs that you look for to demonstrate someone's maybe aging too fast?
Well, looking in the mirror is actually is
Okay.
actually a pretty good one. Um, and it's interesting that epigenetic age, which is basically done by looking at DNA methylation patterns on DNA. Methyl groups are little carbons with three hydrogens that attach to the DNA and kind of signal certain genes not to be expressed or certain genes to be expressed. And there's a bit more to it than that. But the idea is that those methylation patterns are quite consistent across biological age for all mammals.
Mm,
And it turns out that the DNA methylation ages actually correlate with physical appearance. So if you look in the mirror and you look a little older than most people your chronological age, then you're aging faster. If you look younger than people your chronological age, then you're probably aging a little bit slower. Um,
right.
so that's probably the most down and dirty kind of sense of kind of where you
I
are.
love it. I love something that's practical. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So that's pretty straightforward. I think the other thing, I mean, there's so many things to go into this, of course, but the other thing is how you move, right? So, what's your ability to, go for a run, climb stairs? What's your balance like? Simple things you can do at home, right? Can you run down the stairs? Can you, without holding on the guardrail? Things like that. If you're if you're not able to do that, then really what's happening is, your nervous system is aging, and I think. We think about working out and we think about our joint health and all that, and all of that's true and important. But ultimately, it's the nervous system that controls everything. And so the way you think, the way you move, what you think is possible, what you believe you can do, what you can't do, all of it's related to the nervous system. So I think the other thing to see is you can gauge yourself if you have a youthful mindset by asking, am I married to my current answers or am I married to my questions? Right? Because I think a lot of times we go through life and people feel like it's their duty to kind of find their answers, right? I'm going through life to find my answers. When in actual fact, all progress comes from questions, not answers, and all answers have a shelf life, right? I mean, some of them are durable in a way, but they get modified and morphed, right? So you can look at your mindset around am I learning and growing and curious and asking questions and asking bigger questions and questioning the answers I currently have. Are those the best answers for me now at this point in time? And I think if you feel like you're pretty locked in, then I think that's a sign that you're aging also, because I think youthfulness is characterized by curiosity and play and fun and things like that.
I like that. And it reminds me of something that Brian Tracy said, which was this hardening of the psyche, or what he called psychosclerosis.
Hmm.
And so if you find that you've got to do things this way and it's got to be the routine, which, on the one hand, I'm a big fan of routines because those do aid with efficiency and they free up cognition for more, larger, lofty problems to be solved. But there's some nuance here for sure. I totally take your point. I love that remark. And then I wanted to double click quickly on movement, because there's maybe two components to this, or at least here's how your comment has me thinking about this. Part of it could be muscular, right? In terms of the muscles are weak, but I do see a growing case that it might be more so the nervous system. Just reflecting on some of my periods of health where I felt better or worse, I've had some peaks that I wasn't necessarily doing, let's say, a lot of hip mobility, but all of a sudden my hips and my back just felt super strong and engaged. So I've noticed that, yes, there's a muscular component to it. You can't neglect some of these movements, but there's clearly something beyond the musculature. And I was thinking it's either hormonal or it's probably neuroendocrine, right? A combination of both the nervous system and maybe how good of a release of catecholamines you have. But yeah, I really think that's an insightful point in terms of
Yeah.
flexibility, I guess you could say,
Yeah,
both
I think
mentally
you're
and
hitting on
physically.
something here. I mean, you have to have we know that when hormone levels go down, muscles get weaker. We know that, bones get less dense and things like that. And the only way we've been able to rebuild bone density, which we do, is to basically get people's hormones optimized in conjunction with the right supplements, let's say. But to your point, that's all important. But if you really want to see the power of the nervous system, you need to understand that when you first start doing any activity, let's say lifting a weight or going for a run or pedaling a bike or swinging a golf club, the first thing that actually gets stronger is the nervous connection, not the muscle. The muscles along for the ride, right? It's along for the ride. And so, if you don't believe that, well, just look at a stroke victim, right? You lose innervation, there's nothing, right? So the point is, it's the nerves that's driving everything. And so I think it's really, really important to understand that because when I work out now, and I do something every day because that way I don't have to wake up and decide if today's the day I'm going to do something. That way my compliance is, 95, 99, 95%. So there's a few days of travel where it's wacky and I, whatever, can't quite get it there, but that's really rare. You know, I focus on basically training my nervous system. So I did a Vasper workout this morning, which is in a new step with blood flow restriction and things like that. 21-minute protocol. It's interval training, hit training. I went mountain biking yesterday, and I did 14 miles on an elliptigo on Saturday. But when I'm doing those things, those on the weekend, I today was like a little bit of a recovery day. But when I'm on the device, rather than pushing with my muscles, what I'm doing is I'm actually optimizing my nervous system, and I'm doing everything with least effort. So if you've ever played a sport, hit a baseball, hit a golf ball, hit a tennis ball, and you hit it perfectly, right? If you hit it perfectly, there's this feeling of it's just effortless, right? It's just effortless, right? And so when we're working out, I'm going for that effortless feeling. What I find is that when I do that, I'm actually going faster. I'm actually doing more work. My muscles are doing more work than they would if I was pushing with the muscles. But it's also at the same time more effortless, and the nervous system is kind of synchronizing. It's very, very cool. So you can play with that if you next time you do a workout, don't focus on the muscles. Just think about your nervous system.
Yeah, that resonates because I've recently sort of been focusing less on the maximal weight performance when I'm weightlifting and more on just making sure I have good engagement, which I think is really probably mostly upstream nervous system. And it's, downstream, the muscles will turn on, but it's really obviously the nerves that control the muscles. And so one of the things I've been doing, and I always remember what Paul Chek had said, he's not the first one to say it, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, I heard this. He said, most people will need to go through a period of corrective exercise at some point in their life, meaning you fall into sort of aberrant movement patterns. And I think I was probably, when doing things like deadlift and squatting, even though I was trying not to, a little bit quad dominated, probably not enough engagement of the core and of the
Hmm.
glutes. And so now I'm backing down the weights. I'm doing all these things to wake up the nervous system before, like box jump
That's
ups
right.
and lateral bounds. And then I go back to the bar and I'm lifting less weight, but I'm noticing the engagement is just much better. To your
Right.
point, I feel like I'm hitting that golf swing perfectly every time
Right.
I do a rep.
Right.
There's no tension. I
Right.
feel explosive. I feel
Yep.
coordinated. Yeah. So great points.
Yeah. So it is fascinating, right? And I think, people always talk about, well, lower down your weight and maintain your form, right? It was always maintain your form. That comment to me is really about allow your nervous system to come into balance and equilibrium and allow your nervous system to do that perfect kind of thing. And then the muscles come along for the ride. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you remind me of something that Mike Nelson said to me, which was he, rather than thinking about form, focuses on cueing. Like one of the cues is picture someone's, pulling your
There you
head up
go.
before
Yeah.
you to do a
Yeah.
deadlift or squat.
Right.
That just kind of gets you into alignment because you don't want to fall
Exactly.
into like a high school yearbook photo where it's like, look to the left, turn, and you feel so awkward
That's right.
when you smile. So people are too focused on moving a certain way. I think they lose what's a more global correction, which is sort of
That's right. I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. And that applies to anything. It applies to swimming, to driving. It applies to anything, your nervous system. And balance is such an overlooked element of this. We're big fans of of exercising not only static but dynamic balance with all kinds of balance boards. We have slack lines. We have all kinds of stuff in our gym up here to challenge the nervous system. And whether you can do it or not is completely immaterial. The only thing that matters is that you're challenging the nervous system. It's like a puzzle, and just like when you're 3 years old and your brain, it's like you can't ride your bike yet, but you're trying, your nervous system's figuring it out. You never want to move away from that. People get caught up in this. It's kind of a dead end of competency where if I don't look good, if I can't do it, I'm not going to do it because, it's my self-image is that I'm competent. What you want to do is throw that aside. You really just you want to keep trying new things all the time. That's what your nervous system loves. That's what will keep you young, quite honestly. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's humbling, right? If you do something new, if you can get on board with the concept of sort of being humbled and not being good at something, I agree.
Yeah.
There's so much reward waiting for you on the other side. So I guess a point for people in our audience, if you are exercising, amazing. That's a fantastic
Beautiful.
first step.
Yep.
Next step would be try to have a variety of different ways that you move and challenges that
That's
you
right.
use. And you said something, or at least I think you did. I'm going to infer a little bit, but it sounds like we're doing things similar where we have some days that are easier, meaning going for a
That's right.
ride, as compared to a day when maybe I'm going to do sled pushes and sprints. But
Yep.
having that ability, coming back to the nervous system, there might be a day, a Friday, let's say, where I'm just kind of shot. It's been a long week,
Yep.
heavy cognitive projects were worked on. Come Friday, I just don't have the oomph to go
Right.
get behind a weight sled and do sprints. But
Right.
going for a ride on a bike or an elliptical, I can
Yeah.
totally do that. And I like to say, just don't do nothing. So having
That's
these
right.
levels of exercise that you can pick from helps a lot.
It's so important. It's so important. I think people have this idea that they're supposed to go into the gym or do their activity, and they're supposed to do their personal best that day, right? And if they lift this or they rode this section of the course this way, or they hit this golf ball, scored this, that they're supposed to do that every single time. And actually, what the body really likes is it likes to cycle. Every Olympic athlete, they're not at peak form all the time. What they're doing is they're building to peak at the games. But Usain Bolt can't run 9.58 every time he goes and runs 100 meters, right? I mean, that's a peak experience. So it's really important for the body to recover. And you have to remember when you're lifting weights, you're not building strength when you're lifting weights, you're actually tearing down your muscles. It's during the recovery time that you're building the strength. So if you don't give yourself adequate time to recover, then you can't really gain all the benefit of the effort that you're doing.
And such a recurring theme with so many healthy or hormetic stressors is acutely they're abrasive, if you will. And then
Yeah,
long term, as your body adapts, you become stronger.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, love it.
You touched on mitochondria, and maybe we can jump to what dietary strategies you think are best for mitochondrial health? Because I do want to really drill down into mitochondria. Some things that obviously may come to mind for people is keto, fasting, blood sugar. There's also maybe some nuance here where too much fasting, too low carb may not be optimal, especially too low protein if we're talking about fasting and caloric consumption.
Yeah.
So what I appreciate about your perspective is you're not just talking about this, you're consulting with people one on one.
Hmm.
And so that's where you really get a chance to see where there's weak points in the arguments or compliance might be really low or whatever looked good
Right.
as a theory may not map onto clinical application very well. So how do you think about diet? That's a very broad question, but
Yeah, I think about we think about the mitochondria a lot. There's some things that you do specifically for the mitochondria, right? Like an ozone sauna or something that boosts NAD levels or red light therapy or things like that. Those are kind of directed right at the mitochondria, right, in terms of improving ATP production. And we love all that. The other thing that really focuses on mitochondrial health is molecular hydrogen, right? It really helps you manage the oxidative stress. It upregulates the three sort of
wait, I'm sorry. Let's define that for people if they have. I think many people probably have heard of it, but can you give
yeah.
people what that is, how they use it, and then yeah, let's talk more about that.
Yeah, molecular hydrogen. So it's H2, and it's the most abundant atom in the universe. It turns out that molecular hydrogen has some really incredible health benefits, and you can drink it, you can take a bath in it, you can get it in an IV, and you can basically inhale it. So The easiest way to get it is to put some tablets in some water and let it dissolve. It's usually the tablets are comprised of magnesium and some other elements. And
Which I did this morning, by the way. I,
okay,
I
good
do
for you. Yeah.
morning and pre-workout.
Nice, nice. Yeah, we love it. So anyway, it basically generates hydrogen gas in the water. There's a chemical reaction between the magnesium and the H2O that liberates the H2. So it looks kind of like if you drop a fizzy in the bottom of a glass of water, it sort of fizzes and you get bubbles and you get this magnesium film that's left. It doesn't taste bad. It's, I don't know, to me, it's a little citrusy. Um, and you drink it down fairly quickly because the hydrogen will, of course, dissipate into the air. And you use it out of a glass or a metal cup so that it doesn't bleed through the sidewalls of the plastic if you're using something like that. So, that being said, once it gets into your system, it's pretty magical. It has the ability to upregulate superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, catalase. So the three enzymes that basically, in kind of an assembly line fashion, will take a free radical that's generated from the mitochondria when it's burning oxygen and burning fuel. Think of your mitochondria like an engine, right? It's burning oxygen, it's burning fuel. It has exhaust. The exhaust are the free radicals, and the hydrogen potentiates the ability of the catalytic converter to handle those toxic particles. That's pretty much what's going on. And so, as things wear down and mitochondria get weaker and cell membranes get weaker and things like that, uh, there's more oxidative stress. And then the mitochondrial DNA gets damaged. And then the electron transport chain gets compromised because the membranes get compromised by the oxygen free radicals. So, in the aging process, it's very important to continue to upregulate that. And genetically, some people are more gifted than others in their genetic expression of those three enzymes. So if you know your genetics and you know that, hey, I don't make superoxide dismutase very well, or whatever, then there are things you can do to upregulate that. Like either you can give clisodin, which will upregulate it, or you can take molecular hydrogen, which will upregulate it. And if you're low on glutathione peroxidase or your glutathione levels are low, rather than taking glutathione, we're big fans of Glynac. So you can basically build glutathione that way. But the point is, those are things, excuse me, those are things you do directly for the mitochondria. But really, mitochondrial health depends a lot on the quality of everything else, right? Like the fatty acids that you're getting in, right? Can you maintain the membranes? And there's a membrane out there, membrane fatty acid called C15 that you probably have heard about. It basically is a pentadecanoic acid that now is being shown to maybe be more powerful than rapamycin in terms of the longevity benefits, right? It upregulates many things, but it's also associated with membrane integrity. And so you can look at
This is that.
membrane
Sorry, Jeff.
integrity
This
a
is
couple
this is
different
that
ways.
new fatty acid. I think it's in a white bottle. I think I saw it
That's right.
come through.
Called fatty 15.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I never had a chance to research that. So you're a fan of it, I take, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, it's really quite quite interesting. Yeah, we become fans of it. It turns out that in blue zones, people have higher levels of C15. It's kind of a trace fat, like it's not a high percentage of the fat in your cell membrane, but for them it might be like zero point 0.4 to 0.6% of the cell membrane fats. When we measure people, most of the people we measure are like zero point 0.1 or 0.09 or 0.08 or 1.1 or somewhere in there.
And these are people I'm assuming are already on a pretty decent diet. You're not seeing
Yep.
like a standard American
Yep.
population. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, these are people that are clients that are, their diet's dialed in, they're doing stuff, and that's where they're coming out. And
Interesting.
it turns out that the reason that it's high in the blue zones, some of them at least, they're eating cheeses. It comes from dairy. They're eating cheeses that are rich in dietary dairy fat, and they're eating aged cheeses, which are concentrating the C15. And so some of these healthy cheeses are boosting their C15 levels, which is pretty interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Very interesting. Yeah, it's one of the things that gives me pause about people being on overly restrictive diets. And I get it. You need those tools sometimes
that's right.
to heal as sort of a rehab plan.
That's
But
right.
just one more reminder for our audience, as we heal one's gut, amongst other things, and food tolerance increases, really try to expand and
That's right.
be careful about what you've been told, right? Because if you can find some guru that vilifies literally I mean, it's getting to
Everything.
the point now where
Everything.
broccoli now, some people
That's
are
right.
criticizing.
That's right.
And then coming back to molecular hydrogen, what
Yeah.
really caught my attention was a meta-analysis that was published, I think, just this year. So a meta-analysis for our audience, just a quick reminder, is going to summarize multiple clinical trials, give you an aggregation of what the research is showing, demonstrating improvements over placebo when administered to people with chronic fatigue for their energy
Yep.
levels.
Yeah.
So it's not just theoretical. There's some decent science
Yep.
that's published on, and for something that costs, I don't know, what is it, Jeff? $30, $40, maybe $50
Yeah.
for a bottle. It's
That's
not
right.
expensive, very
No,
easy
it's
to
not.
do.
That's right. It's very doable. Yeah. And I'll just say this: we've actually imprinted our hydrogen with information using an infoceutical from NES. So we have hydrogen that contains energy. We have hydrogen that contains chill. And we did not published trials, but little trials with this, and it's remarkable. Like if you take this at 2 in the afternoon when you're feeling tired, you perk right back up. 10, 15 minutes later, it's like, oh, wow, just woke up. It's really remarkable. Hydrogen in and of itself is great. They did a head-to-head trial of hydrogen and caffeine in college students that were sleep deprived. And they find that hydrogen did as well as caffeine in terms of rebooting their brains. It just did it by a different mechanism. Yeah. So hydrogen is for real. I mean, it's really it's the real deal. That's so anyway. But yeah, I think back to the mitochondria. I think all those things can be helpful, but you do want to have this good diet. You do want to rest. You do want to sleep, and all the basics, of course. Inflammation in general which is obviously related to the gut. So taking care of all the baseline things goes a long ways towards helping your mitochondria work properly. And then mitochondria love to be exercised, right? Those engines love to be revved, right? If you've got a Ferrari, you want to rev it to 9,000 RPMs. Your
Gotta
mitochondria
drive
want
it.
to be,
Yeah.
yeah, they want to be worked, right? They do. And so if you're not doing the aerobic exercise to really rev those mitochondria, then you're missing an opportunity for health.
Yeah, so let's pivot over there to exercise for mitochondrial health. Then I want to ask you about some testing options. But since you mentioned exercise, we've been discussing maybe three targets. This is not a exhaustive model, but you've got your zone 2 or lower level cardio. You've got your high end sort of VO2 max, really maxing out, and you've got your strength and stability. It's just loose heuristic. So the zone 2, is it you're feeling that zone 2 is most conducive to supporting the health of the mitochondria?
No.
Okay, well, please elaborate, because I've heard a lot of conflicting things on this, and so I'd love to give people an overview of, you want to be doing all of these, but how do you think about each
Right.
one in terms of what people should be doing and maybe some indications for how much? Some people say go every other day, do your low-level cardio one day, then weight training the next day. How do you come at this?
Yeah. So we come at it from the lens of understanding that VO2 max is one of the real, very important metrics when it comes to longevity in terms of prediction of, how many years you'll live, whether you'll have cancer, whether you'll have dementia, whether you'll have heart disease. It's not the only metric like this, of course. There are many others that are very, very important as well. But when it comes to cardiovascular health, for sure, VO2 max is really, really it's a big deal.
Which is
And
your high,
so
just for our audience, that's your high end. That's kind of as fast as you can rev the Ferrari, so to speak.
yeah, it's essentially VO2 max. You're right. It's at the high end. It's at the full end, full extent. And what it really boils down to is how much blood. Really, what it's measuring is how much oxygen can your body use. That's VO2 max, right? How much oxygen can your body use? And that's a function of mitochondrial health. But ultimately, it's also a surrogate marker, or another marker for how much blood can your heart pump, right? Because in order to get oxygen to the mitochondria, the heart's got to be pumping it, right? So we look at it as how much blood can your heart pump? And that's VO2 max. And the more blood your heart can pump per minute, the stronger you are, the healthier you are, the longer you live, the better everything is, right? And so we've worked with people. I've been measuring VO2 max now almost for 20 years. And so we've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I have no bias in this. I'll just report to you what we've seen. So people come in and they'll say, "Well, I'm doing a lot of zone 2. I'm building my VO2 max." It's like, "Great. Let's put you on the bike and see what happens." VO2 maxes are low. People come in and they say, "Oh, I'm doing Orange Theory. My trainer says I'm getting all kinds of cardio out of this. We're doing HIIT. We're doing all this stuff. Great. Let's put you on the bike." Their VO2 maxes are low. Then we talk to people that are doing zone 3 and they do intermittent stuff at zone 5, and they do protracted cardio. They're out riding a bike for an hour or 45 minutes. They go for a run. They do this kind. Their VO2s are the highest because when they actually combine sustained cardio, not at zone 2, but at a level where you can't carry on a conversation, right? And then they peak it out with, zone 5, right, where you're all in. I mean, you get to the top of the hill and you're breathless. That's zone 5. Those people, highest VO2s, no doubt. The highest VO2s we've measured have been in triathletes, you know, running, biking, swimming, right? And they've had the highest VO2s that we've had. Um, the we had one guy who was a bodybuilder who was a natural non-steroid, non-hormone associated bodybuilder who also did a lot of cardio. He had the most power on the bike of any person. He pushed 400 watts. There was only one other guy, a triathlete, that could do that. And he also had a very high VO2 because he actually did cardio along with his weight stuff. So I think what we find is that many trainers are misleading people that they're getting cardio while they're doing resistance training. It's just not really happening to the extent they're getting some. It's much better than sitting on the couch, but they're not building VO2 the way that they could
Yeah.
if they actually just focus on the cardio piece. So that's
Yeah,
what
I
we've learned.
agree. No,
Yeah.
I mean, great points there. So to hit and respond to a few of those, totally agree that there are some that say all you need is weight training.
Yeah.
And I would agree that weight training arguably is foundational, meaning if you can only do one, maybe you'd want to only do weight training for the muscle mass and for some of the cardio carryover. But I think that's debatable, right? So the point I'm trying to make is the people who tell you all you've got to do is weight training and don't do cardio because it's going to kill your body composition. As an athlete, as a former college athlete and someone who's gone all over the spectrum, I have not felt my best when I was only doing weights, even if it was weights as HIIT training, where I'm walking out of the gym dripping in sweat and feeling like I had a vision because I worked so hard. There's
Right.
something different that you get when you're
It's different.
going for a 3 or 5 mile run or a 10 or a 15-mile ride
Right.
as one component. And then along with that, when you're doing those, trying to hit your VO2 max efforts where you feel like you're going to cough up a lung because you're pushing
Hmm.
so hard for 1, 2, or 3 minutes. It's just a different
Yeah.
adaptation.
It's a different adaptation. I agree. And I really wish that that you could do zone 2 and build VO2 out the wazoo. I mean, I wish that was the case because we'd have more people with great VO2s. Um, and there are so many people that actually I find people fall into two camps. They really prefer cardio or they really prefer resistance training. And that's kind of their bias, right? And it's so important for the people that love cardio to do resistance training, and it's so important for the resistance training loving people to do cardio
Yeah.
because you really want both. And when you think about it, all of this training we talked earlier about comes down to training the nervous system. So you want to train your nervous system. You think, movement is training your nervous system. Well, it is. So the weights are doing that, but so's running, so's biking, right? Navigating yourself around trees and all that. Your nervous system is dialed in, man. And you are building your whole parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system tone to handle those stresses in a way that you're just not getting or able to get, quite honestly, with weight training. And just like with that, you're getting, you know, stronger neural connections and stronger joints and everything else. I do both because I know that I'm a much better mountain biker when I'm doing resistance training, and I'm a much better resistance trainer when I'm doing mountain biking. So that's it.
Yeah, and just to put a practical example out there, you want to be able to do all things. I remember
That's right.
a friend I had when I was in college. Again, coming from a college athletics background, the guy had a build like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just everyone's like,
Sure.
"Oh man, so and so looks so great." And we went and played soccer one day, and it was like I was running circles around him. Literally,
Right.
he's like a salamander, right? All he could do was these bodybuilding movements, and so
That's right.
now you come to where you're a little bit older, and yeah, it's challenging when you, let's say, go for a ride and then you want to do a quick half-mile run. But the
Right.
more you challenge your body to adapt, and I guess it's your body, your nervous system, and your muscular system,
Yeah.
you notice, boy, it's getting much easier to go from a ride to a run to a row to hitting the
Mhm.
bag. And I no
Yep.
longer feel like when I go from biking to running, everything is tight and it's hard to sort of
Right.
elongate.
Right.
And this is, I think, what we ultimately want. We want to be able to have, our kids run at us and grab them and throw them up in the air, and then run a
Yep.
little sprint after them and reach
That's
down
right.
and grab them and just be able to move fluidly. So it would make
That's
sense
it.
that the more we're doing a multitude of movements, just like eating a
That's
lot
right.
of different vegetables is good for the
Yeah.
various
Right.
polyphenols they contain, we want to be moving in as diverse of a swath as we possibly can.
I agree. I think if you can move in as many ways as possible, I've become very enamored, and I haven't really started doing it yet, but I'm very enamored with the concept of functional fitness, where these guys are down on the floor and they're moving around and they're doing all these body weight exercises and stretches and positions, and those people, man, when you look at those people, they are ripped, and they also have incredible flexibility, right? You talk about their hips and everything else. One of the downsides of weight training, or running for that matter, is that you kind of over exercise and you people get stiff and limited in terms of how much flexibility they have, right? So
I'll raise my hand on that one.
well, there you go, right? And so,
Yeah.
what we really want is we want flexibility with strength. And so, I think some of the functional training stuff is really quite phenomenal for that. Um, so yeah,
And let me just backpedal for 1 second to the zone two, because this is something that I feel has gotten so much press, the importance of zone two, lower level steady state cardio. And I don't refute that, but I do think it's really important that people, along with the zone two, are maybe doing some, like you've said, zone three and then zone five. So zone three is going to
hundred
be,
percent,
like you said, and I've intuitively found my way here where I did for a while, and I still do a decent amount of zone two, but there are moments when I just want to open up the throttle a little bit.
yeah,
And then
totally,
even moments where I want to go hit my max and then
yeah,
recover. So
right,
within this concept of training different movements, I guess this is just training different intensities.
that's right,
I would also say if every workout is an hour of you being zone three, zone four, that might be a little bit too aggressive in
it
terms of
is,
maybe you'll burn out. So, I think
yeah,
the pyramid model of the bottom of the pyramid is zone two, one
hmm,
rung up is some zone three, and the pinnacle is sort of some zone five or some maxing out. That's maybe a good way of visualizing this.
yeah. I think you should understand that zone four, there's not a whole lot of value in zone four. It's just kind of like almost like you're overstressing. Now, zone five obviously is a higher stress, but because you're doing it at max output and you're actually becoming, anaerobic, you should understand that your cells are powered by two motors, right? Everybody's a hybrid car. The mitochondria is the aerobic motor. It's burning oxygen and fuel, making ATP and shooting off exhaust. Well, that's one motor. The other motor, though, is the glycolytic pathway, and that sits in the cytoplasm, and it only burns glucose. Both those motors make CO2, but it only burns glucose. And you can actually, we measure this, you can get an idea of how in shape somebody is by how far can the mitochondria carry them before the hybrid motor has to kick in.
Mm,
Right. That
I like
that's
that.
called the anaerobic threshold, and that's actually a great measure of how in shape somebody is. But when you're all in on exercise, when you're in zone five, you've got both motors firing on all cylinders, and consequently, you're actually expelling more CO2 than you're taking in oxygen,
Mm.
because both motors are making CO2, but only one is burning oxygen.
And that's what
Right.
eventually slows you down, to my understanding, is
Exactly.
it's the CO2 buildup.
Exactly. And if you train at those higher levels, you can actually train your body
Tolerate
um,
more.
right,
Yeah.
to actually handle that and metabolize the oxidative stress and the acidity and the lactate that comes out. All those things you can train your body to utilize that stuff. That's where blood flow restriction exercise comes in, which is, like the Vespers blood flow restriction with interval training. So now you're actually getting the benefits of interval training plus blood flow restriction. I find when I do that, you build strength so much more quickly, and you recover so much faster. It's really a pretty phenomenal thing to throw in there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I have some courtesy again, and thank you for Mike T. Nelson for sending me some of these straps, I guess they're called. I haven't yet used them, but this is,
Hmm.
a good poke for me to integrate
Yeah,
even
give them a
more.
shot. No, you'll like it. They're really good. Like drop your weight down a little bit and do a few more reps, and you'll see. It's
Yeah,
really about what it is it's about augmenting the hormetic stress.
sure.
It's almost about with less effort, you can augment the hormetic stress and get more built. So
Sure. Let's come over to mitochondrial testing. To me, this feels a little bit like a can of worms. I've come across a mito swab test as one option. There does
yeah,
seem to be a dizzying array of various, what I believe are mostly going to be indirect measures, because to my understanding, if you do a direct measure, you literally have to biopsy tissue. But
yeah.
What do you think is worth thinking about and maybe even doing in the way of testing here for mitochondria?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of the ways that we look at it is actually with a cardiopulmonary exercise test, which is how we measure
Mm,
VO2 max and anaerobic threshold. So
love it.
if we can see what's the transition from fat burning to carb burning. So the other important thing for the audience to understand is that fat is regular gas and carbohydrate is premium fuel. You get 34, this isn't exactly perfect, but you'll get the idea. You get about 34 ATP from fat and about 36 from carbs. So when you are at rest, we can actually measure your resting metabolic rate and we can see what percentage of fat are you using at rest. And if your mitochondria are healthy, you'll be using a high percentage of regular gas at rest. Should be 80% or greater, right? And you can train yourself with intermittent fasting, with more of a keto diet, to prefer fat, right? I have some triathletes that have massive exercise capacity, and yet they've trained themselves to burn carbs because that's how they fuel themselves in these longer races. And so they burn less fat at rest, not because they're unhealthy, but because they've trained themselves to burn more carbs. So, but the transition from fat burning at rest to 100% carb burning at peak exercise, and this is what's really important for you to understand is that if you don't have glycogen stores in your muscle and in your liver, when you are all in on exercise, you are burning 100% carbs. I don't care what kind of diet you're on, because you get 36 ATP and you're going to burn all premium fuel. So if you've starved yourself of carbs, you're not going to be able to do that, right? So you do want to have some carbs in there, right? And so the transition though from fat burning to carb burning, looking at that line, we can see if somebody has to jump up to carb burning early or whether or not it's a nice linear progression. And that's a direct measure of mitochondrial health also, because if the mitochondria are healthy and robust, they can burn that fat and make energy and then transition to carb burning right up the line as they increase output. But if they have to jump to carbs early, you know right away the mitochondria aren't healthy, right? So that's
Yeah.
another way to look at it.
So you're getting me thinking about something that I've been pondering lately, which is okay. In our clinic, we're seeing a number of people that have had some sort of somewhat chronic, whether chronic is 3 months or longer, or maybe 5 years plus in some cases, inflammatory issue. It might be bacterial overgrowth, fungal overgrowth. Maybe there's some sort of vector-borne infection like Bartonella, Babesia, Borrelia, Lyme. Maybe there's prior mold exposure. So there's just sort of this ethos of a degree of chronic inflammation, presumably, right? We're not quantifying this, but there's enough symptoms there where we can say, okay, it's pretty obvious there's some degree of chronic inflammation. I look at that in the context of the cell danger response, where we know heightened levels of inflammation and reactive oxygen species will sort of govern or limit the function of the mitochondria, because if there's already inflammation, plus the mitochondria make some inflammation as a byproduct of metabolism, then it's an adaptive mechanism where if there's a lot of inflammation, the body's going to limit how much additional inflammation the mitochondria can produce. And this can lead to people having things like fatigue. But also, I think this is why some people report, I just can't do lower carb. I get tired, I don't sleep well. And I suspect in this cohort, not in everybody, what's happening is a chronic inflammatory stressor is limiting mitochondrial function, is limiting their ability to fast and do keto. And so now we're starting to play around with some protocols, obviously, that address the source of the inflammation, whether it be an infection or an overgrowth, in tandem with that using certain nutrients that help sort of get the mitochondria unstuck. Have you seen this? And if so, thoughts or tips with how to help those people who say, I just can't do low carb, I didn't respond well. And sure, there's a few caveats of, did they eat adequate fat? Do they have adequate electrolytes? Do they eat adequate calories? Because
Mhm.
sometimes people just,
Yeah,
they cut out the carbs and change nothing. And that's going to be a problem, obviously.
that's right.
But with those fundamentals addressed, enough fat, enough calories, enough electrolytes, the people that just don't seem to be able to flip into fat burning, keto fasting metabolism, where do you start or what do you think about?
Well, first off, genetically, there's some small percentage of the population that's actually biased towards carb burning, no matter what.
Sure. Do you know what
So for
percentage that
those
is
people,
roughly?
Yeah. So for those, it's like 5, 7% of the population or something. So for those people, they're going to be carb burners, right? And they could think about fasting, but they're never going to do well on a keto diet because they're just genetically sort of primed to burn carbs. So that's one set. The other thing is that the mitochondria, as you pointed out, they are the sentinels of the cell. So when an infection comes in, let's say the mitochondria are big and juicy and they look like that big cigar-shaped organelle that you're used to seeing. But what happens when a virus shows up or a bacteria shows up or inflammation shows up? They basically break down into smaller little pieces. I don't know if you've seen that, but they actually break down. The audience I'm speaking, I don't know if you've seen this, but the mitochondria, they break down into these smaller little circles, and part of that is to limit energy production because they don't want to have a lot of ATP around that the bacteria could use to perpetuate themselves. So everybody feels tired when they're sick because the mitochondria are shutting down ATP production, right? So if you have chronic inflammation and it's related to a chronic infection, you can go into this cellular defense response, which is the mitochondria actually shut down. And there's 2 or 3 stages to actually get the mitochondria back. And sometimes what happens in chronic fatigue syndrome or extended Lyme or COVID, long COVID, or things like that, is the mitochondria, instead of resuming back to a healthy, big plump mitochondria that's able to generate ATP, it gets stuck in these intermediate steps and has a hard time getting out. In fact, there's been data done on autistic kids where they're permanently stuck and they can't get their brains to work properly because they're stuck. And when they get them unstuck, all of a sudden they start relating to people and their brains work better and all this other stuff, right? Which is really fascinating. So, so when you have chronic fatigue, it's important to understand that to your point, that the mitochondria are stuck. And so one of the things that we do is we like to use ozone because we find that ozone actually really changes the NAD to NADH ratio. And when that happens, all of a sudden the mitochondria start producing uh, more energy. And so using an ozone sauna can be helpful. EBOO, spelled EBOO, we use that as well because it'll filter toxins out of the blood, bacteria, viruses, mold. And we've seen mold levels go down, titers go down, stuff like that. But it's also ozonating the blood. And so you're kind of getting 2 for 1 with that technology. So we go after it with ozone, we go after it with NAD precursors. We like Vitality from Jfinity. It seems to do the best at raising intracellular NAD levels. We measure those. So we try to measure everything we can, and what we see is we get people to where they feel great again. Quite honestly, long COVID, Lyme, doesn't matter. We can fix those people, it seems like.
Well, I'm a big fan of ozone. We recently did a review of the evidence on this and some of the mechanisms for that NRF2 pathway where the oxidative stress of ozone, because ozone is a hormetic stressor. It's going to create additional free radicals in the short term,
Right.
but then you literally have gene and DNA transcription factors of more production of glutathione, superoxide dismutase. So I think there's a lot there therapeutically. There's different applications, right? I think probably the easiest for people to use would be rectal ozone. Not that it's the most fun or easy to administer, but you can get a home setup
Yeah.
for maybe $1,300-$1,500. Then there's ozone saunas. There's also the 10 pass ozone IV that I believe Lahadny really sort of pioneered.
We do that. We do that in our office. We have a
So
Herman generator from Germany, and we do that as
yeah,
well.
yeah, it seems Germany is
Yeah.
who is supplying these.
Right.
So for people who maybe don't have access to an ozone sauna locally or a 10 pass IV ozone, do you think
Hmm.
rectal ozone is a
Yeah.
decent starting
Yeah.
point?
Rectal insufflation has been shown to be incredibly helpful. Also, it's been interesting for people that have chronic cystitis, right? And even prostate issues. Doing insufflation into the bladder can be incredibly helpful. So, both of those orifices work. You don't want to breathe it. That's the one thing. If you're listening to this, you don't want to breathe ozone. It's very toxic to your lungs. So it's interesting. It's so toxic to your lungs, but it's actually helpful to everything else. It's also incredibly helpful for pain. Like if you have bursitis and you inject ozone, like we inject ozone into bursitis, It's like magic. It's gone, literally gone in like 30 seconds. It's like the pain goes away and it accelerates healing to where it simply doesn't come back. So we inject it into joints, bursa, all kinds of things. So there's other ways to get it, in more specific applications.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. With
But
rectal, do you find, we've been advising some people on doing the home protocols, and so for the audience, the way this is set up is you have a bag and you fill the bag with ozone, and then via a very small tube you administer it rectally. Uh, I've seen different protocols, but it does seem if the volume is much above 200 milliliter, excuse me, then people start having some funkiness with gas or just I think it actually stretches the rectal tissue too much.
sure.
Do you find that there's an upper limit in terms of, I guess I'm asking about the volume and then the concentration?
Yeah. I know about rectal insufflation, but we don't use it. I've,
Okay.
I've never really been drawn to it, particularly since I have all the other modalities.
Sure.
I
Well,
really
you're gonna get a
tend to
much
like.
higher dose with the IV. I don't know about the
I like the
ozone
ozone
sauna.
sauna, quite honestly. The ozone sauna is great. We have a Hocket; those are fairly expensive, but there are other ones out there that you can get for 8 or 9 or 10K, and it is more expensive than the insufflation. But I don't know; it's a little more comfortable for some people. It's also really good for your skin. Does a bunch of
Yeah.
other things too. So yeah.
If someone had to pick between doing a 10 pass ozone treatment and a ozone sauna, where do you think most, as a generalization, where do you think most of the benefit lies?
I think it depends on what you're treating. So if you've got cancer, if you've got a bad infection, if you've got something really nasty going on, you want to go IV. If you're doing it for general health purposes, then using the sauna is perfectly adequate. Is what we found.
And how are you dosing that? Is it like a few times per week for a few weeks and then maintenance of some sort?
Yeah, so with the ozone sauna, you don't want to use it more than twice a week. To your point, it is a hormetic stress, and if you overdo it, you can overdo it. It's like you don't want to run 10 miles every day. Let's say it. If you did it on a Sunday, that's fine, and then you do a couple shorter runs during the week, that's fine too. But with this, you basically want to just do it like twice a week. So we tend to do it maybe, quite honestly, maybe closer to every week. Um, and what happens is it does change this NAD to NADH ratio, which is super important. And if you combine that with something called C3G, which blocks CD38, which breaks down your NAD, then you can actually really boost your NAD levels and you walk around feeling like you're, floating in the air. I mean, it's really, the energy levels are pretty nuts. So
Mm,
it's pretty cool.
okay. Oh, certainly getting my attention.
Yeah.
um, what about, because I mean, there's so many directions we could go here, Jeff, but hyperbaric oxygen therapy, I've become an increasing fan looking at, again, this cohort that we see with chronic inflammation, especially chronic infection, many of the mechanisms that are perturbed by those occurrences,
Hmm.
hyperbaric oxygen therapy improves, right? You have increased
Yep.
mitochondrial efficiency,
Yep.
density, energy production, you have improved
Yep.
circulation, reduced
Yep.
blood viscosity, increased immune system function. I'm assuming you're a fan of HBOT, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we think hyperbaric oxygen has benefit. I think a lot of the home units don't take you up to enough pressure to actually get the full benefits. But if you can get into an actual hyperbaric chamber, I think it can be very beneficial. I will say that there have been a lot of head-to-head studies between hyperbaric oxygen and ozone always trumps it. Ozone's always better than hyperbaric for any indication.
I would love to see these comparative trials because this is a question I've been thinking a lot about.
So yeah, so
So
we're big fans of
what
ozone,
pressures you're
but I
wanting to
think
see pressures with the hyperbaric of, I'm assuming, what, 2 atmosphere or
yeah,
above?
I think at least 2 to 2.5, somewhere in there. I think a lot of the home ones are like 1.4, 1.8, somewhere in there. So,
Yeah, 1.3 to 1.5 for most home units. So we did find a company recently that does rentals, which I think is a really awesome service that they're offering people. They'll mail you the unit, you set it up at home, and they have pressures up to 2.0. And then
okay.
usually, if you're going medical grade, that's going to be, they'll offer 1.3, but typically the medical grade's above 2.0. And I haven't seen many clinics that go above 2.4. There's probably some out there, but,
Yep.
and I've actually done a series at 2.4. And I have to say, boy, I felt kind of like you were saying with the NAD precursors and such, just like a machine. There, and
Right.
I was 24/7, but there was definitely moments where I was saying, "Holy smokes! I just feel
Right.
this
Right.
unexhaustible well of energy and focus,
Right.
and it's pretty
Exactly.
amazing.
Exactly. That's what you get. Yeah, with that, and that's what you kind of get when you do the ozone sauna with the right supplements on board. It just sort of turbocharges everything. It lasts for about 4 to 5 days, and then sort of wears off.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
mhm.
And boy, this is a kind of whole podcast maybe in and of itself, but are there any peptides? I know there's tons of peptides, but are there any that you think are sort of worth honorable mention?
Oh, all of them. I think
Yeah,
peptides are amazing. We have an IRB approved trial here where we now have access to every peptide. Um, so with our no restrictions for us being able to get peptides. So for our
which for the
clients,
audience, this is relevant now because the FDA has really been putting progressive restrictions on the use
right,
and distribution of
that's right.
peptides.
And so people are now going to oral peptides, and there are a few oral peptides that are super helpful, as you probably know, for the gut, right? So oral BPC and KPV together can be incredibly helpful for healing the gut. In fact, body protection compound 157 is made by your gut. So you're basically just giving yourself more of what you're already making. Um, but we love the peptides. I mean, CJC 1295 with ipamorelin to release growth hormone. As we age, we make growth hormone, we just don't release it. So being able to do that, we love BPC, we love KPV, we love GHKCU, which is a copper-based peptide that basically improves wound healing and
Skin.
skin.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
like TB4, TB500, which is thymosin beta 4, which also augments muscle healing and growth.
Yeah. And immune
And
function
then
too. That's a really cool peptide.
yeah, it's very cool. And then we love the thymus gland peptides, right? Like thymosin alpha 1 for
Mhm.
boosting the immune system. It's actually in clinical trials for cancer right now.
Mm.
Thymolin can be very good for modulating the immune system, and yeah, on and on. So we love the peptides, really.
With any of the GI peptides, do you see some flaring of symptoms in the short term before people get better?
We haven't
Okay.
seen it. Mm-mm.
Yeah, some people I've seen that. I'm just not sure if it's a sensitivity in the cohort that we work with, which was my assumption because I've never read anywhere something
Right.
like BPC is going to cause short-term joint pain or
Yeah.
things like that.
We haven't seen it. What you might be seeing is I might be getting a little bit of a Herx reaction if if in your protocol you're killing off a bunch of stuff. That might be a possibility,
Sure.
right? So,
What are your thoughts on tesamorelin? Because I had someone the other day asking me about, geez, doc, I was using tesamorelin, or I'm sorry, I was using CJC 1295 with
hmm
epamorelin, feeling really good on that. I
hmm
switched over to tesamorelin. Tesamorelin's more so for body fat reduction. I
hmm
didn't feel like I was, this is the remark to me, I didn't feel like I was getting some of the same energy and recovery outcomes with a tesamorelin as I was getting with the CJC. Is it possible for me to combine these? And I know they're hitting overlapping mechanisms. I don't go deep enough into peptides to have any thoughts
yeah.
on this.
So the CJC 1295 ipamorelin is a combination of a growth hormone releasing peptide and a growth hormone releasing hormone. So you're kind of getting both of the receptors for releasing growth hormone. The tesamorelin, I believe, is just a growth hormone releasing peptide. Don't quote me on that. It's one or the other, though. And so tesamorelin's a little more potent in and of itself. Then there's Somorelin out there, which people have probably heard of. That's a little less potent. We've been really happy with the CJC 1295 with ipamorelin. It just seems to
Sure.
work well for our people. People tolerate it well, and they seem to get good results from it. But we're big fans of not doing it all the time. So
That was my
two
next
days
question. How do you kind of cycle it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, the whole mTOR story, right? So you don't want to have mTOR is good for building stuff, but too much mTOR and you get cancer and die younger, right? So that's why rapamycin is important because if you're blocking mTOR intermittently, you're basically allowing autophagy. Now all of a sudden you're getting all the benefits of your intermittent fasting and things, right? If you're on mTOR all the time, it blocks autophagy. So you have to balance these things. It's really a symphony, as I write about it in the book. 100 is the new 30. So anyway, when it comes to mTOR and it comes to these peptides that are growth hormone releasing, growth hormone is going to create IGF-1 in the liver, and that's going to activate mTOR. And so we're big fans of, like, if you're doing testosterone replacement, let's say you inject testosterone on a Monday, take the CJC 1295 with ipamorelin Monday night, right? If you're going to be anabolic, and then take it again Tuesday night. But then don't take it Wednesday or Thursday, right? As your testosterone levels are coming down. Maybe you're going to inject again on Friday. Then take it again for a couple days and then back away. And then if you're going to take rapamycin, rapamycin takes 10 days to get out of your system, right? It has a half-life of 60 hours. So if you're going to do that, you can take your testosterone, maybe a little lower dose during that 10-day period, but don't be dumping growth hormone, releasing peptides on top of the rapamycin. Now you're pushing on the gas and the brake at the same time, right? So that's a good time to really bump up your spermidine and stuff like that. But yeah, for autophagy, yeah.
And with the CJC, typical protocol is at least 2 days off per week. Sounds like you have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective.
Yeah, we're a little bit more on and off. We try to couple it with when you're anabolic, be anabolic. When you're not, you're not. A lot of people say 5 days on, 2 days off, but I think it makes more sense for us to do it the way I just described. So,
in terms of on the macro scale, do you do a number of months and then take a month or so off to maintain sensitivity to receptors? I know that's one thing that people have commented. I think it's theoretical.
Yeah.
I don't know in practice
Yeah.
what you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, I think if you take that 10 days off while you're doing the rapamycin, and we're not doing rapamycin every week, right? And because if you do rapamycin every week, it takes four half-lives to get it out of your system, right? And at 60 hours for a half-life, that's 10 days. So you actually never really get it out of your system. So we like the idea of getting it out of your system. So if you did rapamycin every other week or every third week, and you're not using it, then you're kind of taking a break, right? So that's kind of would be our recommendation, and that's our recommendation. But we don't have hard data to support that. I'm just
Sure.
that's my bias. Yeah.
Tell us more about the book. When did that release, and where can people find that if they're looking to do a deeper
Yeah.
dive?
So it was released in September last year.
Congrats.
It's entitled "100 is the New 30: How Playing the Symphony of Longevity Will Enable Us to Live Young for a Lifetime." And it's basically predicated on four areas actually in the book. I've added a fifth, but a life energy circle, which is the psycho-spiritual space. The idea is to create an exponential response for an exponential problem. And a lot of longevity strategies are linear responses to an exponential problem. Aging itself is exponential. It's not linear, right? We age so much more between 70 and 80, 80 and 90 than we do between 20 and 30, 30 and 40. So if you have a linear response and you don't know the cards you're holding, you don't know your genetics, how are you ever going to win that game, right? So our strategy was to develop an exponential response, and the psycho-spiritual space is incredibly important. Then the longevity space is super important. The longevity circle, this is where we look at the actual hallmarks and drivers of aging, and then the health circle, of course, and then performance. Being fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, great cardiovascular capacity, reserve, recovery, and flexibility. So, that becomes more of an exponential kind of thing. And now the fifth circle is really focusing on the four environments that we all live in, right? Home, work, business travel, vacation travel, and architecting those to support the mission. Because if you haven't consciously architected them, right, you go to Italy for 3 weeks and the wheels come off, right? So it's very, very important to be intentional about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I learned that lesson the hard way. I spent 3 weeks in Manhattan, did not select where I was staying very well, had almost no nature, very hard to get in and out of where I was living. And just, boy, did it grind me down over time.
It really wears you out. Yeah.
Now I'm going to be much more mindful of where I stay. Anything else you want to say on the psycho-spiritual piece? Because we've, on the podcast, so many times in the past, emphasized the importance of not just making 100% of your time and thought about your health, but thinking about serving others, a bigger thing that you're doing with your life, community connection. And I understand when you're feeling really poorly, those things can be hard, but we never want to just totally retire those thoughts and objectives and just, obsess over our health. That can really spin someone out pretty quickly.
That's right. Well, I think the psycho-spiritual space is the circle that binds them all, quite honestly. The life energy circle is the one that binds them all because, mindset is so important. Like, for example, I was born in 1954 in February, right, of 1954, but I wake up 27 every day, right? So having a mindset of youthfulness, right? I can't tell you how many times that's been so, so, so powerful. If I'm a little beat up or not feeling as great, and I wake up in the morning, it's like, well, yeah, but you're good for your age, you're blah, 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 you're better than so many people, blah, blah, blah. I never say that. It's like, I don't feel 27. I want to get back to 27. And that lack of acquiescence to the aging process is so critical to living young for a lifetime. It's just massive.
And that's the way I look at it also is it's a project, right? It's what's
Yeah,
that old saying? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And so we're always trying to improve. And once you've sort of mastered one thing, then there's a new thing to tackle it. And hopefully if we can approach this in a non sort of adversarial mentality with our body, like
that's
I'm
right.
fighting this infection, and then
That's
once I
right.
clear that infection, everything's going to be fine. But rather, I'm working on improving my immune system strength. Then it might be my nervous system. Then it might be my skin. And there's just always this project that you're working on that's never ending, but never ending in an exhaustive way.
Hmm.
Each one of these projects, you're probably getting a little bit of a boost, and you
That's right.
reinvest some of that boost back into the
That's
next
right.
project. And so you're always kind of net positive.
That's right. Your mental state has such a massive impact on your immune system, your inflammation in your body. I mean, it's really the circle that binds them all. And if you really were only had the ability to focus on one thing, that'd be the place to start. When you think about um, all the anxiety and depression and, PTSD and all the things that people end up living in reaction to, being able to go in and understand those things and heal those things and transcend those things to where you're grateful for everything that ever happened to you is massively empowering, right? And then understanding great relationships and having self-love, right? A lot of people don't have self-love, making wise decisions, using joy as your North Star, right? And then I think, one of the biggest ones is I think anxiety, stress, fear, anger, worry, all these things come down to one thing, which is not feeling safe, right? Some level we don't feel safe. And so if we're able to give ourselves love, unconditional love, right, which none of us really got from our parents growing up, at least I didn't, maybe you did, but ultimately we become the parents to our own child and we give ourselves that unconditional love both from the maternal and paternal place and from our own adult self. And then, if that's an inside job, then so is giving ourselves safety because nothing external to us, including our health, can ever make us feel safe, right? No amount of money, no position, no whatever. So, how do you actually ultimately feel safe? Well, that's actually a psycho-spiritual question too. But once you crack the code on those two, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'm good. I healed these things. My relationships are good. And now I can step into my sense of purpose unencumbered by living in reaction to either fear of not being safe or things that traumatized me in the past. And that, when you can do that, now longevity looks like a completely different trajectory. Now it's like, oh, we're stepping into the full expression of Jeff Gladden, right? Or the full expression of Michael Ruscio. So it's like, wow, okay, this is going to be really interesting, right? Now, this is why you'd want to live 200 years. Otherwise, it's not just to play more golf, right? So that's kind of what I think. Yeah.
And you remind me of this, beautifully said, by the way. You remind me of this old axiom that, if I'm remembering correctly, worry is fear of the future, anxiety is fear of the present, and depression is fear of the past.
Mhm.
Something like
Something
that.
along
And
those lines. That's right.
yeah,
Well, in any of those circumstances, we're kind of reacting to something, right? That's no longer like necessarily that relevant. And, when you get down to it, then, um, it raises bigger questions. I firmly believe that aging is going to be solved in the next 3 to 5 years, right? With the combination of all the research happening, information and research and longevity science is basically doubling every 3 months.
mm.
When you
Well,
layer on, yeah, when you
so
layer on AI, right, and you layer on AI, and you layer on quantum computing, and you lay on not only AGI, right, artificial general intelligence, but you get ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. This thing is done. It's over, right? So now the question is, we have it, right? You can live as long as you want, as healthy as you want, right? It's here. So now it raises a question, okay, well, now what? Right?
what do you do?
So, yeah, right?
Yeah,
Like, what's the
yeah.
meaning of life? What's my purpose? Right? And so those are now the really big questions that come forward. And those are so important to answer, because if you don't have good answers for them, just living another 20, 200 years committed to your current answers, you know, I don't know that that's the life you really want to have, right? I think we have an opportunity to step into a reality that nobody's lived in
Sure.
before. And I think it's super interesting.
Somewhat tangential, but also hopefully somewhat related. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he was asking me what he can do to improve his health. He has a few health conditions, and
Yeah,
he's giving me the typical rundown. My GP said this, my um, cardiologist said that. And he said, I have a slight bias here, but I think this is also very supported. You need to get out of the fee for insurance model because there's just so much stuff these doctors are not doing. And
that's right.
I do actually, I'm changing my tune on this because I am putting some of the culpability on the doctors. I used to say, well, it's not the doctor's fault because they're in a tough system, which is true. But at some point, you have to recognize you're in a shitty system and take some steps to change that.
Yeah,
So you can only slave away in a bad system for so long. But nevertheless, there's just so many things that you're not going to get a dialogue on if you're just going to see
that's right.
the regular GP or cardio. And I'm not saying to totally discount and disregard those, but to your point, there is so much data being published on all these therapeutics
That's right.
that if you limit yourself to what insurance is going to cover, you're really shooting yourself in
No,
the
you're
foot, so to
totally
speak.
missing the boat, completely
Yeah.
missing the boat. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Which
Cool.
is probably, very preaching to the choir to our audience, but just to put it out there. Jeff, this has been an
Sure,
amazing conversation. I feel like we could easily talk for another few hours. Let's try to do a part two for sure.
sure.
Where would you want to point people, and any closing thoughts you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested to learn more about us, Gladden Longevity, the website, gladdenlongevity.com. We also have a podcast. We have over 250 episodes, gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. And then the book, 100 is the New 30. And we have a supplement shop also. We've curated some things that we think are particularly helpful for people, including the molecular hydrogen products and things like that. So, yeah, and it's just such a pleasure to chat with you. Obviously, you're super passionate about this and going about it in such a
Yeah.
great way. So I appreciate you having me on. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure chatting, and let's do it again real soon. I'm probably gonna grab a copy of the book because I do think this anti-aging piece it dovetails so nicely to what we do in the clinic, which is people have much more I don't say progress, but they have there's really a significant monkey wrench or two in the system that's causing a lot of suffering. We
hmm
got to get rid of
that's
that
right.
monkey wrench. But then
That's right.
from there, there's this line that we can draw of, like we were saying before, this project that never ends. And this
That's
is where
right.
you pick up a lot of where we leave off from. So this is just a wonderful union.
Beautiful. I love it. All right.
Cool. Well, Jeff, thanks again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.